Kuhn, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon. Thank you for your presentations. Lots to mull over from what you've said. Maybe I'll start with this question. So 5 years ago, government signaled that it was moving to a low carbon economy with the release of its climate action plan. It was clearly labeled transition to a low carbon economy. But what I'm gathering from both of your comments is that didn't land with the business community. And so it now is. Is that fair enough that 5 years ago it wasn't really, it didn't end up on the radar of the business community for whatever reason, but today it is?
Well, I'll start on that just because I've been around maybe on the straight business side a little longer. This statement is not inaccurate. I've not always agreed with your statements before on some of these issues, but there was no clear objectives, like targets, that in our businesses had no real, I don't think they were as engaged as they were today because they were not asked to be part of it. That's some of the words I've heard. The 2016 plan or 2015 plan, which I participated as in my old role, I don't think you had the people writing to me and Alex like they're doing today and trying to be part of the solution. And I think that the plan was too wide brush. Like there was a lot of recommendations, but if we were asking somebody how many were accomplished, how many were effective, how many produced a reduction of carbon emission, we'd be hard pressed to show that today. And maybe it's there, but it's not been communicated. So in fairness to the plan, I think there was good ideas in there, good solutions, but I don't think it gained traction. So I'm basically agreeing with you, Mr. Kuhn.
And I would just add that, as I mentioned in my remarks, the market drivers, the market signals are changing. And first, capital markets are moving in this direction. As I mentioned, the Glasgow Alliance, $130 trillion US, moving towards climate finance commitments. Federal government policy is clearly moving in this direction. 90%, countries representing 90% of global GDP have committed to net zero. So this is where the markets are now. They're moving, and businesses need to be paying attention to that. The third, the carbon pricing, kind of carbon border adjustments, is something that our exporters are likely to face in the near future. So it's something we need to be, a lens we need to be applying to existing businesses and exporters. And lastly, as I mentioned, consumers and voters are looking for greener, cleaner products. And so I think for sure businesses are taking notice of that. Business Council members are aware of it. And as I mentioned, McCain and Atlantic Industries and Portobello Dune are just three examples of members that are really thinking strategically about this from an opportunity and advantage perspective.
I think that's points to one of your recommendations, Mr. LeBlanc, in the sense that McCain's operates in many countries and is well aware of what's happening in the world. The port is necessarily outfacing the world because it's a port and deals with customers in other parts of the world. So it strikes me that your recommendation for investments to help lead, create awareness and literacy around climate action and the opportunities, I guess, there that was in your presentation. Who would you see taking that lead? I mean, you suggested someone in government, but where would it come from?
Well, I think the support for this initiative should come from government, perhaps through the Climate Action Fund or other. I'm not going to get prescriptive in terms of line departments or budgets, but this is obviously critical for the economy in New Brunswick, and I think it's important for the province to support this literacy and education of businesses. In terms of who executes on that, I'm not going to get prescriptive on that either. I think that plan should be developed, though, as I said, in terms of the principles at the end of my presentation. Any programs designed to support businesses should be employer-led, involve employers in the design. It should be as easy as possible to access and transparent. So some of those design principles will help get us to the right place, I think, in terms of who does it and how it gets delivered.
Both you and Mr. Thomas have said that there need to be clear, measurable targets established. Can one or both of you elaborate on like what kinds of targets are you speaking to? Because in the original climate action plan, transitioning to a low carbon economy of 5 years ago, there were clear targets for overall greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, 2050. There were clear targets for the number of EVs on the road. There were, by certain dates, 2 different dates, there were clear targets for achieving investments in energy efficiency, improvements in buildings. So can you expand on that a little bit, please?
Well, for us, for businesses to look at planning windows, typically it's 3 to 5 years. And the issue of the 2030 and further 2035, let's say, for the new target that Canada is aiming for no all vehicle to 2035, these targets without intermediary targets usually don't really occur. I know there was some targets for electric vehicle, but they didn't come up with some incentive, for instance, to promote it like other provinces. They just come up last fall. So when you ask why we did not meet those targets, sometimes it's not just the target, it's the measures. When we said measures and targets to actually achieve the targets, and then who's accountable if you don't make those targets? And you're going to say, well, people don't like electric cars, but Ontario, Quebec, and BC really have been in the business of incentive for the last 5, 6, 7 years. So that's what we mean by a plan to have traction. It's not just words, it's actually concrete actions to achieve those targets. That's an example. Then the business can say, okay, maybe we'll consider our fleet. Governments needs to take leadership in going all electric. The federal government right now has announced that they're gonna go all electric. Well, the province has to say, because if the government can't go all electric, why would the business go all electric? So that's the kind of debates I have members saying, are we really putting the means behind the targets, and or are we hoping that the private sector will do it by itself? Because we still depend on the consumers buying the new goods and the new cleaner products.
Thank you. Well, I've got you there. I was glad to hear you speak about the slowness in adopting national building codes and energy measures in the province. It's something that irks me terribly when new buildings, whether they're commercial or residential, are getting constructed to very old standards and end up having energy waste built in because of the standards they were built to. So I've been asking a few people this: what is your sense of why New Brunswick is so slow relative to most every other province in adopting the most up-to-date standards for construction?
Well, what we've learned through the process, that's the other process. So I'm sitting on this advisory board, so I think I can comment on that because it's a process. The process is actually that when you really want to change the building codes, you have to get all the provinces on board. And what we're hearing is New Brunswick is not the only one. So the process is that, it's almost like, the builders are getting together, they're evaluating the codes, and there's really no incentives right now with the process to make it happen. It can take up to 3 to 4 years to change the building codes. And sometimes they're very simple. And some provinces will adopt them on their own and start doing legislation, and others, but there are some that are just national building codes. So the process is very cumbersome to have all the province involved, and they meet like everybody's on a part-time working small at the time. So somehow I think if the province could help expedite the process, would be to change the process, because the process is make it easy for people to not change boards, and the businesses are not getting the signals to build new building in most provinces today. There are a few, but very few overall. So it doesn't change the supply chain. It doesn't change the volumes necessary to actually get on to all buildings will be net zero or near net zero.
So would home builders and commercial building contractors, builders be among your membership?
Some of them are among our membership, yes, actually quite a few.
Okay, and Mr.
But they have
Lamar,
but they have separate associations that actually are represented, and they're part of this national code changing committee, whatever. They're reviewing. It's a very slow process.
okay, thank you. My time's up.
Thank you, Mr. Kuhn. Ms. Conroy, the floor is now yours.